What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Pro vs. Pro. Second consecutive not so uh, great on paper event here with the John Deere Classic, but we've got some course fit stuff, some recap from last week, which turned out to be a much more exciting event than maybe what we expected going in. Justin, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Yeah, it was a fun week. I think what made it fun too is so many guys at the top, like of the big names, played poorly and still was able to draw a really big crowd. That being said, like we spoke about, the Ricky Fowler draw, I think really helped them up there and really got a lot of people involved. But yeah, all in all, really fun golf tournament. We had some. There was times that it definitely played harder late in the day, which is interesting because it kind of jumbles the field together. But yeah, all in all, really fun week. Not much success in DraftKings with Justin Thomas missing the cut, but outside of that, yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, I like that point you made that a lot of the top of the board kind of didn't show up. And it was interesting because both last week and this week, that was kind of shown by the course fit model where the best players in the field had these expected strokes gain numbers that were below their baseline number, which kind of says, hey, these courses maybe like they don't do a good job of getting the best players in the field to the top. You're going to get more of a mix of some guys down below, which as you'll see this week, like the guys that I'm considering for outright bets would certainly benefit from that being the case once again. However, let's also not overlook the fact that it was Morikawa and Ricky Fowler in that playoff along with Adam Hadwin. So it's not like none of them did. And I think that you mentioned like how much people love Ricky Fowler. I don't think that could possibly be more evident than having a playoff against Colin Morikawa, who himself is a fan favorite, and nobody was rooting for him. It was like vocally everybody was behind Ricky there.
Yeah, and it's kind of been a long time coming. You know, the DFS side of this, like, I'm happy to see him not playing. I'm tired of Ricky Fowler chalk paying off every week, which it has, and I haven't been part of it. So yeah, no, it for sure. He was obviously the clear-cut fan favorite there, and hopefully when we can put to bed all this talk about that putter that him and Keegan and all these guys, they all use this old putter and making a big deal about. Like, hopefully that goes away too.
Yeah, I would like for that to go away as well. I think one of the weirder things watching was how many like really young kids there were dressed as Ricky and all that because those guys, like those kids weren't most likely watching golf at any like reasonable level when Ricky was the Ricky that we remember, right? So it's kind of incredible and a testament to his character and just what he brings to the game that he is still attracting new fans, even though he's only been good again for less than a year.
No doubt. And I mean, like you said, I think that the bright orange and the flat bill hat before the flat bills were popular and all of that has stayed around for a long time. And good for him. He could have mailed it in, called it a career, albeit a very successful career, but he didn't. And I saw some of the videos of the changes they made and how they look like they're so simple. Let me tell you, it's no fun. There's a lot of range balls being hit, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it reminds me of the fact that we've seen Rory in contention so frequently lately, and he hasn't gotten it done. And one of the things that he was saying was, I feel really good about the changes that I've made, the very subtle changes in my swing. Swing feels great, but I don't know if I can yet trust it in the biggest moments. And he hasn't, at least seemingly, been able to trust it in the biggest moments because that's when his swing has fallen apart to some degree. Certainly, what we saw at Muirfield Village at Memorial. So for Ricky to be able to hit the kind of shots that he hit down the stretch, to make the birdie on the last, to make the birdie on the playoff hole, it's really a testament to how far he's come because he's dealt with the disappointment even over the last few months too, down the stretch, right? Like he kind of disappeared on the Sunday at the U.S. Open. So really cool to see him finally get it done once again. Awesome win for Ricky.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think a lot of times it's really easy to disappear on these courses where you have to shoot 5, 6, 7 under, right? It's just difficult to maintain that for 4 days, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, a lot of times too, I never felt like Ricky. It never looked like the moment was too big. I felt like he just didn't get it done. It never was like it was kind of like, hey, golf's hard, and I'm gonna keep plugging away like it's gonna be my time. He never got discouraged and had a letdown, and Man, I've never felt as confident as I did going into like the weekend that Taylor Pendrith was going to get an outright. Like I just never I was just for sure knew he was going to win this week, and then he played terrible.
Still was a great call to have him in contention. Kind of came out of nowhere with that one. One last point on Ricky that I think is worth making. He has talked about, and remember, like he was saying this kind of on the Friday and the Saturday of the U.S. Open before failing, that he doesn't just feel ready again or doesn't feel back, but he feels better than he ever has in his career. Did you think prior to this win that was just kind of like almost him trying to hype himself up and give himself confidence? Or do you think that he was really feeling that good and that's why he was able to then get it done the following week?
I think it was a really sincere thought. I think he really, truly believes he's better than he ever has been. And like, it's funny because that's how I feel about my golf game right now. So I don't know if some of that comes from like age and understanding the game better and then getting back to the same talent level and or even a better talent level as well. And just like the way that confidence works with you. Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, I think it's just what kind of comes with age and gaining confidence and understanding. He's like, oh, I really can do this. It's not a joke, especially after that first week in contention.
Yeah, I think one thing you said there that kind of really resonates, I think, too, is this idea that it's like not necessarily coming with age, but coming with all of the battles that you've had to overcome in the sport, right? So, like, the fact that Ricky went through all the struggles that he did and found his way back to that point, that in and of itself has to breed confidence to some degree.
Yeah, and like I said, I love it for him. I think he's totally earned it. He wasn't given anything, and he didn't ask for anybody's sympathy. He wasn't a woe is me guy. He just went out there and grinded and got it back. To be truly happy for what is known as a big star and a guy that's made a lot of money already, like it's pretty easy to root for him. And I feel like he's just a very sincere person.
Yeah, I feel like Ricky versus Jordan versus JT is more even now than it's ever been in their careers. They're probably having a lot of fun, the three of them, just kind of jawing back and forth about this now.
No doubt, especially with Justin Thomas's struggles have been so bad. Like I didn't see, like I thought I got it figured out last week, but obviously I was wrong because it was terrible this week.
Yeah, hopefully he finds it a little bit quicker than both Ricky and Jordan did. Both of those guys have dealt with some pretty long struggles. Hopefully JT can turn it around a lot quicker than they did. But I have no doubt, really, that Justin will eventually figure it out and be back near the top of the sport again. But anything else from last week that you think is really worth discussing?
No, I mean, a little bit of discussion that can lead into this week is this week's favorite or co-favorite of Aberg. He kind of fell apart on the weekend there and just didn't play very well. Kind of got rattled. I think it's pretty evident that his talent level is super high. I was surprised to see him struggle down the stretch. And my question is now, does that lead into this week? Does that struggle to be in contention, then struggle like that? Does that, as a young kid, lead over into, another golf tournament? Or is his talent so high that it doesn't really matter what golf course, what field, where he's at, he's just going to be in contention?
Yeah, I think there's also maybe an element of like you have to be there in the moment and fail before you are there in the moment and get it done sometimes. So like I don't really look at that as a negative. Maybe it is for the very next week, but in the long run, I think he's certainly better off for putting himself in that position.
Yeah, I just hope it doesn't bounce right back, because I think that going into this week, he's got a field where I think if he's not the most talented player in the field, he's in the top 5 just in talent, not even how they're playing or any kind of course fit or anything like that, but just a sheer talent level.
Yeah, I think the most important point with him too is he has gained well over a stroke per round in all 3 of his events now. Like the guy has been unbelievable off the tee, and how many times can we say it? Like the foundation of success on tour is what you can do off the tee. He's already one of the best drivers in the world, I think. So it's just a matter of does the putter show up in this spike week at some point, right? Because like he's lost strokes in 2 of his 3 events putting. When he gained, it was only a third of a stroke per round. Even bad putters are going to spike on the green every now and then. We don't necessarily know that he's a bad putter yet. So I think he absolutely could contend, and I think his chances of contending and winning are a lot higher given the way that he's gained his strokes and the way he's put himself in contention to this point, more so than if he were just spiking with his irons or making a bunch of putts at this point. He's dominating off the tee. And when you're that dominant off the tee, you're just going to have so many chances to contend.
Yeah, no doubt. And I just think that eventually it's going to come to the forefront, and I think it's going to be sooner than later. And I'm excited. It's fun. It's always fun when they go back to a course like this that, I caddied in this tournament a few years ago for a buddy of mine. So it's always fun when I can watch and see and know kind of what's going on, right? Because when you caddy in a tour event, it's a different kind of preparation. There's a lot of notes and you look at a lot of things from different angles and stuff. And to go into some of the other stuff of it's kind of surprising that guys like Stricker and Zach Johnson were just so dominant here, because like after playing there, like, yes, like length isn't as big of a deal, but it's still not that it doesn't matter at all, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it just shows you how unbelievable those guys were with their wedges.
Yeah, really good point. And speaking of someone awesome with his wedges, let's talk a little bit about Morikawa, because I think on the one hand, you can look at what he just did this past week, losing in the playoff, as maybe something that's not like super indicative of what's to come. Hey, it was a weaker field and all that, and it was a course that certainly really fit his skill set. But at the same time, he gained 3.6 true strokes per round. One of his best, actually, I believe it was his best performance of the year. Like even when he was third at the Farmers, 3.4. When he should have won the Tournament of Champions, 3.0. So this was a phenomenal event from Morikawa. I also like the fact that he gained in every single category. He was great off the tee. He was great with his irons, as he usually is. Where he was much better, much improved, is he gained a ton around the green. We rarely see that from him. And he gained strokes putting for the 4th consecutive event. So all season, pretty much, he has had some inconsistencies off the tee, maybe more so than we're used to seeing, but the driving seems to have stabilized. And now he's finally showing signs of turning things around both on and around the greens. A huge, huge step for him. And we've talked about this same sort of thing with Hovland's around the green play. Morikawa, the struggles have been both around the green and on the green. Maybe he's turning those around. So should we kind of have our eyes really open towards Morikawa when we get to the Open Championship and some of these other events coming up?
So I think the problem with a place like the Open Championship, to compare them, is everything is so different with the firmness and the flight of the golf ball and how it's going to bound kind of around and stuff. So, I'm looking for a little bit more imagination of when it comes to that. But as far as like him contending, his skill set is so good. We've known that. Mm-hmm. And, we literally had this discussion last week about once somebody gets hot time after time after time again. And I think that's what we saw with Morikawa. He got hot, he got comfortable, and he just kept hitting the same shot really close over and over.
Yeah, when he's got it going with his irons, it is a sight to see. And it was also just drilling that beautiful cut off the tee where it almost looks like it's headed towards trees left or something, and then just right back to the center. So pretty to watch when it's working like that.
Yeah, it was a great, just a really good display of golf all the way around. I mean, a lot of those guys, even Hadwin played, obviously played awesome, but like I didn't feel like we found a luck leaderboard. I felt like who was on the leaderboard, everybody was really playing well. And I don't know if you saw, but Hadwin was genuinely happy for Ricky Fowler too after Ricky won that playoff. Like that tells you something for somebody to not even be that good of friends, but just around him in the locker room and really be happy for somebody else.
100%. Let's move towards the John Deere Classic now, because I think, a lot of the people watching, they just want to know, who are we betting? And this week, I don't necessarily know the answer to that question. I've got a number of guys that I want to talk through with you. So let's start with a bit of a course fit discussion. Course fit model this week, pretty close to tour averages across the board. Everything is predictive to some degree. There's a slight decrease on the predictive value of distance here. Driving accuracy, hour strokes gained, driving accuracy, I should say, quite predictive, as we would expect on a birdie fest. Iron play does get the biggest boost relative to baselines, and then both around the green play and putting, both predictive as well. So it's a bit of a mix between, we're seeing a little bit of what we expect on a birdie fest. Approach play slightly more important accuracy slightly more important than distance off the tee. Approach play kind of reigning supreme. No surprises there. But there's also an element here that maybe you wouldn't expect, that everything is predictive. A lot of the time when we say something like, this course tests all aspects of golf and guys with no holes in their game are really well suited for this course, we're usually talking about difficult golf courses where pars are going to gain on the field. That's not the case here. This is a birdie fest, and yet we're seeing the emphasis all around. Do you take anything specific from that, or is it just, hey, it's a golf tournament, it's a golf course, everything should be predictive to some degree?
I think somewhere in the middle between the two. I think that a lot of the guys, they find themselves laying up. The ones that lay up, they all lay up to the same spot. That's why you get the decrease in distance.
Yep.
There's probably 3 or 4 holes that I can remember right off the top of my head where everybody's ball kind of ends up in the same spot, whether it be down the hill or a layup shot or whatever it is. So I think that's why. And a lot of those times, you're laying up to, let's call it 9 irons, not necessarily sand wedges. So I think there's where your approach play comes in, because they're not, they're not.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit there for me. I don't know if you did just for me or overall, but I think the point you're making, just in case you broke up for everybody there, is that there's a little bit extra signal when you get to these clubs where the best guys and the worst guys have a little bit more separation. Those mid irons, maybe longer wedges, like 130 to 150 yards than the 80-yard shot, that type of thing. So, I agree. It's certainly not surprising to see the signal that approach play gets. The next aspect of course fit that I want to talk about with you is something that I alluded to a little bit earlier. If you take a look at the course fit expected strokes gain projections, you'll see the guy who actually leads this field in course fit expected strokes gained, Russell Henley, $10,400 on DraftKings, so actually appropriately priced there, but only 1.16 expected strokes gained from a course fit perspective. Compare that to his baseline of 1.47, and you kind of see the same pattern throughout. Most of these players, with the exception of the guys who are course fit specialists, at least at the top of the board, are projected to gain more strokes in a generic event than they are in this event. And again, I think what that tells us is not something about the strength of this model. We know the predictive value of this model is fairly strong. It's certainly above average on tour. I gave it a 6 out of 10 in the reliability rating. But I think it more so says, this course, more than others on tour, is going to lead to players being kind of bunched up, a lot like we saw last week, where the best players in the field are going to have a little bit more difficult of a time separating from some of those secondary players in the field. From an outright perspective, do you then agree that we should really be targeting kind of the mid-range of the pricing, or even really, really long shots and kind of ignoring the top of the board?
So the only problem that I have with that is I just feel like there's enough guys in this field that are truly more talented, that if they play their best, there's no matter what golf course they are on in this field, they're going to win. Whether they could be a 70-yard par 3 golf course or the longest golf course in the world, there's enough talent dispersion, I think, amongst a few players here that if they're playing well, Cam Young is one, Aberg is one. I mean, just that group there's a few guys there that I think they could truly dominate. But yeah, if you're gonna move on from there, there's some guys that are way down bottom. I mean, I think that I'm playing my lowest price DraftKings guy this week that I have all year. So
who else would you put in that top tier guys who are separated from the field? I think my list would be there's a clear top three of Henley, Hebert, and Cam Young. And then I would maybe put Eric Cole into that group as well.
So I love Eric Cole, and Taylor Moore has to be discussed in there as well.
Yeah. He's an interesting one because I definitely think he's in that top tier talent-wise and like what I expect from him moving forward. He was so bad prior to last week, though. I don't know if I can immediately put him back into that top tier just for this week specifically.
I think that a lot of things too. I think this golf course fits him well. I think that like he's one of those guys. I think when he feels like he's the best player around, he plays better, right? And I think when he gets to the tee here, he's going to feel like he's the best player in the field right now, and that tends to really help his mindset. If he obviously played a little bit better last week, but you combine that with him showing up and feeling like he should be the favorite, I think that he'll embrace that and play well.
I think that's a phenomenal point. Does it give you any pause that he was pretty much only in contention last week because of the putter, where he was pretty much neutral off the tee and approach, like with his ball striking? He gained a little bit around the green and gained almost 2.5 strokes per round, which is just absurd putting.
It doesn't because of you don't have to hit driver as much here if you don't want to. There's different ways to get it done. So without looking directly at stats, I just think that he can overcome most of that by the way he plays the golf course. So I think that this is an interesting, like I said, I think this golf course, I think it just aligns for everything that he has going to play well here. But yeah, I think that, you have those 5 or 6 guys that I think their talent, there was a time that I thought we were going to put Seamus Power in that group by the way he played for a while, but he seemed to have fallen off. I'm not sure, I'm not sure that we can really put anybody else. I mean, you can't, Denny McCarthy's was the best part of there, but he's not, you can't put him in that top tier talent wise.
Yeah, I would agree there. Let's see if we can put some numbers to this. So Taylor Moore is the best available is 30-1 on him. Now, 30-1 is an implied probability of 3.2%. So 3.2% chance of winning. We only have him at 1.5%. So that's a major leap to call him a solid outright bet. Do you think that we are too low on him, or do you think that even though he's in the top tier of talent in this field, that again, like the top of the odds board is just so difficult to get there? For some context, we only have one player in this field, Cameron Young, at 3.9%, ahead of that 3.2% number.
Yeah, I just think it's just everything trending in that direction. All the stats lead to him not being in contention. It's more of hey, his talent is there. If he can put it together, that's how he wins. Not necessarily the way he's been playing or even course fit for that deal, for that matter. But I think, like you said, that I don't think like last week you didn't have a bunch of guys that were just way higher than what the number you were given. Everybody was kind of right around the number that was put out there.
Yeah, very true there. So for some additional context, like we have Hebert third in win probability at 2.6%, but his implied probability is 3.9%. So even though we are pretty much right in line with the market in terms of who should be favored and all of that, we find nothing close to value on any of these top guys, which means we pretty much have to find value down the board. The first guy that I want to talk about with you, and I want to start here because I think it could end up being a fairly lengthy conversation, is Lonto Griffin. Lonto is 300-1. So I think where I want to start this conversation is this. If he hadn't gotten hurt, if he was still playing kind of the way that he played last spring, where do you think that he would be on the odds board this week?
Obviously a lot higher than where he is. But, I just don't think but besides the getting hurt, and then he just hasn't seemed to find he hasn't found any kind of form back. I haven't seen anything. I'm like, oh, he's getting closer. And I mean, obviously at 300 to 1, like he has the talent to compete. So 300 to 1 seems obnoxious, but I still would never see him right here more than, the 65 or 70 to 1 is about where I would think he should be.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, if he had a spring going like he had last year, had rolled off 5 top 20s in 6 events or whatever, then you'd have to consider him in that Eric Cole 35 or 40 to 1 range.
Yeah, he had 3 events last year where he gained 2.5 true strokes per round. I think that's a really key number. It shows that he has in him the upside to post a number that has a real chance of winning this event multiple times in a year. So I think that I would have said, without the injuries and stuff, he could have been 30 to 40 to 1 in this field. Now, he didn't sustain that success throughout the entire season. Like, even before he was hurt, he had some pretty poor performances before a 15th and a 6th place finish then in May. Then he got hurt. He's been pretty disastrous. As you said, the form hasn't been there. And this is the next place that I want to go to in the Lonto discussion, because historically, what has made Lonto Griffin a really successful golfer at this level is really strong iron play and strong putting. Guy makes a lot of putts and gives himself a lot of looks with his iron play. Lately, both have been really bad. And so one of the things that I like to look at in my own analysis is, like, I want to find the guys who aren't just playing well, but they're performing in the areas that we know that they can sustain success in. And the reverse is then just as concerning. If we need success from his iron play and his putting to really believe in him, and the iron play and putting have been really bad, that makes it a lot harder to buy in. Where I give some pause to that thought is this. Number one, we actually saw the best ball striking from him this past week than he's had in over a year. He gained over a stroke per round off the tee and gained just under half a stroke per round with his irons. That was his best iron performance since the beginning of April, actually. Putting has still been really bad, but from a player's perspective, do you feel like putting is something that, once you're in contention again, once you've made a few putts, you've seen a few fall, do you think you can kind of just flip the switch and be more who you've been in the long term than recently?
Yeah, I think that putting is the least predictive thing that you could ever measure. I mean, think about all the times you play and you hit really good putts that don't go in, and then other times where, like, you may pull one and it goes in, or you may like it. So we've talked about this a bunch. So if he got going, I wouldn't be surprised. And the other thing about that is we kind of have 3 weeks or 4 weeks in a row here of where we've played similar type of golf courses. All not be, obviously not exactly like last week. I think will be more drivers than this week off the tee. But that being said, you have similar grass types. Got to make a lot of birdies. There's just a lot of similarities in these, these 3 or 4 weeks in a row. And do you think that plays any part into some of these guys that are, maybe trying to find it of like, hey, we've got kind of the same idea. I got a little bit better. Am I going to, let's just improve on that?
Yeah, I think there could definitely be something to that. It maybe helps find a rhythm that you haven't been able to find in so long. But I think the bigger point for me is just like the way in which he missed last week's cut was actually pretty intriguing and encouraging. Again, the ball striking was there. It hasn't been there. He was really bad around the greens and really bad with the putter again. But you can kind of make an argument that, look, those two aspects of the game are so psychological that once they're spiraling out of control, they can get really out of control. But then the flip side is, once you make 1 or 2 really good putts again, once you convert 1 or 2 difficult up and downs that you needed again, psychologically it just flips, and you can start getting it done again, particularly because he's somebody that in the long run has been able to do so, at least on the greens. He's always been bad around the greens. I don't necessarily see that flipping, but the better he's hitting the ball and the more putts he's making, the less his around the green play is really going to come into play. So I think the upside is there. Where I will kind of make a distinction here is I have no interest whatsoever in Lonzo Griffin on DraftKings. This is an outright only discussion, and it's only even that because he's 300 to 1, not 150 to 1.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some other guys down in that range that I like this week. So I obviously I won't be. I probably won't be on him in DraftKings, but just because I think there's other guys that kind of. Well, let's go. This is a good segue into one of the guys that I want to talk about, and I'd love to get your opinion here of a guy that maybe doesn't seem to have very good form, but he's playing golf courses that don't fit him at all. And then we get to a golf course that maybe fits the way he plays way better, and that's Paul Haley. So he's a local Dallas kid, played really, really good at the Colonial, top 10 at the Colonial, and this is an easy version of Colonial, right? It's a softer greens, easier type of golf course, but it's still where, the length, he hits it. When I tell you he hits it nowhere, he hits it nowhere. He's got to be at the bottom eighth of the field in driving distance. But I feel like you can maybe catch him at such a low price and such a high. I mean, I wouldn't be much interested in his outright because I'm not sure that he has the firepower to win. But if he went out and finished 10th, it wouldn't be as surprising at all. Just because I feel like the course fit for him is a huge deal.
I'll tell you this. It's going to have to be a huge deal because his track record is pretty ugly. He has gained strokes on the field once since January. Actually. Since the
Colonial, right?
He's gained once. The really strange thing is when he gained that one time, he gained over 2.5 strokes per round, finishing 5th at the Charles Schwab. You don't see that sort of thing very often. Like over 2.5 strokes per round is really, really good. There are guys who make a pretty consistent living on tour, gaining 2.5 strokes per round once or twice a year. And so the fact that the one time he gained it was that is pretty wild to see. And it probably does get to your point. Like this is a guy who, number one, maybe a lot more sensitive to course fit than most players, but also that is probably a better player deep down, has more talent than what he's shown to this point. So if you are going to try and be way ahead of the curve on somebody, this is at least the type of profile that you want to look for. Somebody who has underperformed who they truly are, and yet while they've underperformed, they have at least shown the potential to not just be okay in a given week, but to be genuinely great in a given week.
And that's kind of my point here is like, I mean, I think once again, obviously being from here, knowing him more on a personal level than the other guys, you kind of realize that he's not quite lived up to his expectations of how he thought he would play. Kind of, a grinder. But I think that, when I think of this golf course and of being there and think of the players that have had success at a course like this, he kind of fits that mold. And if he was going to be able to break out of his slump, I think this would be a great spot for him to do it.
It's pretty much exactly how I feel about Brandon Matthews, by the way. It's the same thing. It's like I can look at his stats all day long. I know that he's a much better golfer than what he's done on the tour level. And it might only take like one or two solid events to gain the confidence and to start playing like his actual self. So certainly if he's somebody that you want to just kind of ignore the data on, I understand the process that's bringing you there.
And the opposite side of that with Brandon Matthews, I think Brandon Matthews has like the talent to be like a great player on tour for a long time. I'm not necessarily saying that I feel that way about Paul Haley. He's going to be one of those guys that he has 12 events a year where he has to make all of his money. And I just feel like this is one of those that fits that mold.
Very fair. Next guy I want to talk about is Davis Thompson, somebody who was a pretty popular like breakout candidate at the beginning of the year. Hasn't really come to fruition, but he's showing enough in the models to make me interested. He's at 100 to 1 at 4 different books now, which gives an implied probability just under 1%. And we have him at 1.2%. There are a couple things about his game that I like. Number one, his strength is off the tee. We love to see that. Number two, and this is a fairly similar argument to the one that I made last week about Davis Riley and the one I made before that with Keegan Bradley, which is he hasn't really shown much upside in terms of his results lately. So if we look at it like this past week was his best week in a long time at plus 1.1 strokes gained per round. He did gain over 3.6 in his second place finish in January at the American Express. So we've at least seen like that crazy upside from him this season. But the thing that I notice is his results aren't quite indicative of how much upside he has because he's pretty consistently paired great rounds with bad rounds. And all you need to correct that and to have a spike week isn't to suddenly have more great rounds than you've had. It's just to eliminate the bad when you get those great rounds. And that's easier in my mind. I think considerably easier than somebody who's unable to consistently have those great rounds to just suddenly find them. I think it's easier to cut out the really bad than to gain the really good that you don't get very often. So I like that aspect of it. I'm curious your thoughts on Thompson.
I think he's going to kind of benefit from the same thing as Taylor Moore too. I think he's kind of got that attitude where he's going to get here, and if he plays good round one, hey, I am one of the best players here. I have a chance to show it. It's not so overwhelming like some of the other golf tournaments. So yeah, I really like him this week. I think this is, if he gets off to a good start, I think you may see at least 3 good rounds together. We'll see what happens with the fourth, but I do think that he's intriguing this week because of the mental aspect of the field and the golf course and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that angle of it. And, he's 24 years old. So I think that's probably especially true of him where, you and I have felt it. Like there are some tournaments where you show up to and it's like, you know what? Talent-wise, I'm not quite at the level of these guys. I'm going to need like a 90th percentile outcome just to, have a good finish. And then there are other events where you show up and I'm probably the best player here. And if I just play my game, I'm going to be near the top, if not winning this thing. And that just gives you a sense of confidence, right? You don't feel like you have to do anything special. You can just go play your game. You can be patient if you don't start quite as well as you'd like. You know that you have plenty of time to find it and still get the results you want. So I like that angle that you're bringing to this discussion with him.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that's just not everybody you can use that, because I don't think you can say that about a lot of people in this field. I think that there's, a handful that you can be. And like you said, he's young. He's shown that he can compete, and then he gets to a little bit weaker field. He's shown that he's not afraid to make a bunch of birdies. There's a lot of positives that can go with the way that he just thinks into this deal.
You made the point before we went live that in this type of field, in this type of event, there's a bit of an advantage for somebody like you who's consistently trying to almost go against the data and find the guys who, anybody looking at a projection model or anyone using data to kind of project and estimate talent levels is going to be too low on this guy. I think this guy's better than his numbers, better than his results, all of that stuff. Does Davis Thompson fit that mold for you?
Yeah, I for sure. So I've got like 4 or 5 guys right down there in that range that all kind of fit that mold that, mentally I think that they can be and physically are better than their prices and what they've done so far. And I think that there's such a factor with the mental side with the field strength and stuff like that. There's another one just above him, and Callum Tarrant.
Real quick, before you go on to some other guys, because we absolutely want to hear who the others are, I want to make one final point on Thompson, which is I was kind of on edge with Thompson on whether or not to bet him. Again, we have him estimated at 1.2% chance of winning. His implied probability is slightly under 1%. So the fact that you're then also saying this is probably a guy who may be underestimated by the models, that gives me a little bit more conviction on Thompson. Thompson is going to be a bet of mine this week. Now let's hear about Tarrant and all of the other guys in this range.
Well, Tarrant, I just think fits that same bill of like he likes to make birdies in bunches, likes this kind of golf course, is in good form, has played good recently. And I think, we got paired with him at when I caddied at the Veritex here, the Corn Ferry event here. and just, the way he hit it and the way that you could just see the potential on a golf course where you have to make a lot of birdies. And so I think he really is another one that's, I want to be ahead of the curve this week that has shown some signs of life here recently.
I like that. He's 80-1, by the way. So it's almost like the markets are. I think this is a sign that Thompson is being slept on by the market more than anything else. Like, I don't necessarily think 80 is a bad number on Taryn, but if you're going to put Taryn and Thompson in the same group, and Thompson actually projects better, then why is Thompson at longer odds than Taryn?
Yeah, I think that you're right. I'm just I haven't looked at one number. I'm actually surprised that that's not opposite.
Right, me too. In fact, I'm like really surprised about it. So yet another reason to go and place this Thompson bet.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and I don't know if he'll go overlooked at DraftKings at that price or not, but I would guess he probably will as well. This price range to me in DraftKings, this like the 6,500 or 6,700 to 7,500 has a lot of really skilled players in it for such a weak field. I mean,
yeah, it does. It has a number of guys who they'd be 7,500 to 8,000 if they just got it to click. Like, we know the talent is there, they just haven't been able to put it together, or at least they haven't been able to put it together recently, like the Lonzo Griffin.
Well, example. I mean, I would see some of these guys that are at 7,000 to 7,500 that would be the same price in an elevated event. I mean, like that's what's, Will Gordon, Sam Stevens, like a lot of these guys they're all going to be this price in an elevated event. It's weird to see him at this price. I mean, Carson Young's 7,300 and he's been playing really good. Like, he's a really good young player. And now you're going to put him in a non-elevated event at such a short price.
Do you think that means that we should just live in that range, guys, that we have this like really clear benchmark that we can relate them to what their prices are in the elevated events and say, in this field, that means that they're underpriced and we should just live there as our low range?
Yeah, I just think there's so many guys that are cheap that you could almost build a whole lineup 7,500 and under and feel okay about it. Like, it's just weird to me the way that it's priced, but I wonder if they just did it because there's nobody really to pay up for. I mean,
yeah. I also think that the result of this could be that there are so many intriguing names in this range for this field, for this event, that we could see some really spread out ownership in these price ranges, which would honestly would be fairly similar to last week too in that sense, but it would mean that at the top of the board, we don't have to consider ownership at all. We can say we know we're getting different and we're getting contrarian upside with our value plays no matter who we choose. So the top end should just be the guys that we're the most confident in, which is something that you talked about last week, was a key to your success the previous week at the Travelers on DraftKings, where you just went Cantlay, Schauffele and got all of that like win equity and made cut equity at the top, and then went to your contrarian upside elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think you don't have to. I think a lot of people think you have to be contrarian across the board, and I just don't believe that. I mean, if you've got conviction on one or two guys, play them. There's so many other places to get contrarian, and I mean, the chances of it's not like, especially single entry stuff, the chances of being duped are almost zero. Matter of fact, I don't know if I've ever seen my lineup duped in a 200 single. Like, so what are you really concerned with there as long as your guys play good?
I think the most important point in this conversation is to be aware of what you're asking of each player in your lineup. Like every player, just like on a team in real life, every player has their role. And so if Russell Henley this week is 30%, and I have no idea what his ownership is going to be, it's probably not going to be that high, but let's say he was 30%. Well, then if you're using Henley, just know you're not asking Henley to win you a GPP. Even if he wins the tournament, you still have to beat 30% of other guys in that contest with the other 5 guys in your lineup. So his role then is to complement the contrarian upside that you do have in your lineup. let's say you went to a really contrarian Lonto Griffin or Davis Thompson, something like that, right? You're asking Henley to maximize the probability of capitalizing on being right about those long shot, high risk, high reward guys. That's then Henley's role. And as long as you have these like really clear, well defined roles from every player in your lineup, where you have some guys who their role is to help you win the GPP, and the other guys, their role is to just maximize the probability of the lineup as a whole hitting. If you're right about those contrarian upside guys, then you're going to be really well off, and you don't have to worry about differentiating at every single spot.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you do this, but I literally, like, as soon as it locks, just about every time I look at the percentages of, my lines and say, all right, this is what I need out of this guy. And, when I finished seventh a couple weeks ago at the Travelers in the 200 single, I knew that I needed a good week out of Gary Woodland because he was like 1.5%. So I knew that I could kill the field there if he got going. And then there was somebody, I think it was somebody like Shoffley or somebody like that, was only 10% or something. And so he became the big name that I was rooting for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how, like, once you get into the tournaments, and especially once you get near the top, like, some guys can mean infinitely more than others in your lineup, where it may be the case that like everybody in the top 15 has one guy, so you don't even care if down the stretch he's making bogeys, but nobody else has this other guy who to that point in the day is one over, but every single birdie that he makes is going to launch you like 5 more spots to the top. It's crazy how those sweats end up in those tournaments, and that's part of the fun. But
no doubt. I mean, when Gary Woodland didn't make that birdie for 3 in a row, I knew I was like, there was my chance. Like that was so like brutal. That's my chance, and I just got to watch it all unfold. Like, do you think, before we get out of this 7,000 price range, do you believe that Zach Johnson is just going to be through the roof chalk?
I don't know. He certainly doesn't project well. Let's see, what has he done lately?
He's at least been making cuts lately, so his form is a little bit better.
I think so. He just lost 1.5 strokes per round with his approach play. I think that's going to scare people off. Yeah, he did make the cut. Had it actually a decent finish at the Travelers. I think if he had played well last week after playing well at the Travelers, then this week he would be major chalk. I don't think people are going to chase the course history from him too much. There will certainly be people who just play him regardless. And like Ches Reavie did for you a couple weeks ago, like he certainly could deliver this week. But I don't think he's going to be that popular. And I think that people are starting to realize, like, at least with these guys who are older, course history matters a lot less for a player when you can pretty clearly see that the guy is not the caliber of player that he was for most of his career.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I've had people mention, hey, what do you think about Zach Johnson? Is he going to be uber chalk? And I never really, I never thought about it. I hope he is. I hope everybody plays it.
Absolutely.
So I just was curious of your thought. I mean, he definitely, has been playing a little bit better. What he's done here speaks for itself. It was just more of a curiosity deal of what you thought. I'll be interested to see his numbers. I won't play him anyway. It doesn't matter whether he's 1% or 41%.
All right. I think that'll do it for this week's show. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Reminder, there's a ton of NFL content being released every day now at FTN. We've got the DFS early bird special up. Go grab that price before it leaves. I believe it's $199 for this season. It's going to bump to $250 as of July 10th or something like that. So go check that out. The DFS package has best ball included. Best ball is just taking off. It is so much fun to draft those teams. Start doing it today. It's a blast. We will catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in.